Welcome to the Child's View today, and I'm with my colleagues Bernadette Towns and Sharon Brown, which many of you know by now. But today we're going to talk about a topic that's a little bit sadder. It is addressing the topic of death. It could be illness and death, but specifically death with young children. So in the past year, we've heard a lot about death, and these world issues are things that we really have to talk with children about because they're watching them, right? They hear adults have conversations about them, the television is on oftentimes, and they have questions. So first of all, it's important to note that developmentally, children don't understand the concept of death until about 5 to 7 years old. They don't understand that it's final, and that when somebody dies, that the whole body stops, essentially. And so they have a very difficult time with that. Now, children earlier have shown some understanding, but it usually is related to the experiences they've had with death, unfortunately. But parents and teachers, family members have to be prepared to have these conversations. So, we've talked a lot about stress and reducing our own stress when somebody dies within a family. Many times the parents and the grandparents or siblings may be having a difficult time. So we have to tap into that. We have to recognize that and honor that, of course. And then we also need to be prepared to discuss it with our children. So there's lots of strategies for doing that. First and foremost, we have to listen and understand where they're coming from, what they understand about it. We have to gauge understanding because that kind of gives us our starting point in terms of what we need to talk with them about. And then there are lots of appropriate materials depending on their age. There's books, which we've talked a lot about. Saying Goodbye to Lulu is one of my favorite books. It's about the death of a dog, pets, in the classroom, at home. Pets die.
And I don't think as adults we take into consideration how hard it is for a child to lose a pet. Even a goldfish. We think, okay, it's a goldfish. Unfortunately, we send it out to sea. Most people flush things down, and we don't treat it with the respect that it needs to have,
or depth, as you said. We don't go into enough depth.
We'll get you another goldfish, but then we don't really talk about what happened, and so they don't have that understanding, and so therefore they think differently about it. They mourn differently than we do, and oftentimes it is after a period of time, then they remember, it died, and then they have another moment, and we don't understand that as adults. Sometimes,
in the process is often important to talk about, and we talked about plants before, and so talking about the life cycle and things, are born and they grow and they die, is an important conversation to have, and we can relate that to other things like nature. The Fall of Freddie the Leaf is one of my favorites by Leo Buscaglia. And it's about the life cycle of Freddie the Leaf and the seasons and what he goes through. So these are nice ways to, I think, to offer books before somebody dies, just to have these conversations, grow plants, take care of animals. And when that event happens, then we kind of have a starting point. So, listen to children. Have honest, open conversations, but appropriate conversations.
Exactly.
It's also a good time to start teaching feeling words because oftentimes children don't know how to describe what they're feeling. And so, I'm sad, or, I feel disappointed or angry. These words are really abstract for them, but as they continue to live and have experiences, and then as you help give meaning to that, then they start to put the meaning together, and they're able to use them appropriately to describe what they're feeling or get in touch with what they're feeling, because they sometimes are not in touch really with how they feel.
Exactly. But sometimes also it's hard for parents to talk about death because they're trying to deal with their own grief. And they don't want to talk about it because they're trying to work through theirs. So they they can't help the child work through theirs.
Right. Well, and that's where strategies really come in, and understanding the grief cycle, right, where children are in that, putting words to it, but understanding it in ourselves as well. Right. And so sometimes it's a matter of taking that journey together, I think, with your child, whether it's, journaling or it might be seeking help. Yeah. Right. I know some of the... I had a really good friend, and we actually carpooled, and she died at 28. Her children were very little, and that was one of the hardest days. Literally, the children still went to school. And I found out that she died while I was picking the children up, and they were in the back seat, and I could not figure out what to do. So, of course, I went and bought books, and I bought journals, and Dad was reeling. But they, I can't remember the doctor they went to, but he had actually lined them up with grief counselors for Dad and for the kids. So I thought that was nice. Yeah, because there's resources. We need support.
Right.
When you talk about the cycle of death, and then also that then sometimes new birth happens, and I remember my father passed away just a few years ago, and everybody at my work got together and they bought me a plant for him, and we planted it in the yard, and every time I go out there and I'm like, there's Dad's plant, sort of like, he lives on. And so giving children something to kind of connect and allow them to express.
That's exactly what happens in this book. They plant a tree where they buried Lulu, and every year the tree comes, blooms, so it connects. Yes. I know that when my husband died, I had a hard time dealing with the grief cycle. The first thing that I remember when it really hit home for me that he was gone was when I opened the refrigerator and there wasn't any milk, because he was the one that did the shopping. And there wasn't any milk, and it was just like, then it hit me. And so I think as parents of young children, teachers of young children, we need to see that there's going to be a trigger that's going to that child is going to say.
Right. There's hills and valleys, right? Yeah. We have good days and we have these really hard days.
One of my teachers, when I was a director of a child development center, a dove flew into their window. Boom. and it
broke its neck.
It broke its neck. Yeah. Oh. And so her team teacher said, "Oh, we got to get rid of it really quick." And the kids were just like, one of our birds, because we fed the birds. We had bird feeders and one of our birds. And so this teacher had the insightfulness to go out. She took one of those cafeteria type trays out, put the bird on it, brought it in. The kids got to look at the bird. They got to see what happened to the bird, touch the bird, and then they buried the bird. And so they went through this whole thing, and some of the little kids for, probably a week, maybe even 2, and the art area, they would make little things, and they took it out and they stuck it in the ground where the bird was buried, and they had this whole thing, and she talked to them about it every day because they were worried about the other birds coming and hitting the windows. So when they have people in their family dying, they're going to be worrying, are you going to die?
Yes.
Are you going to die? And so we need to be able to talk to them about it and let them...
Well, and ritual and ceremony is cultural, right? I mean, that's kind of part of that process. Of, okay, let's honor what happened. We love this person. Let's talk about it. And of course, in different cultures, they handle it differently. But that whole process of burying. This is funny, speaking of the goldfish, but... and you hate to make light, but Bev Boz, her center is just, people have been very well aware of it for years, but the last time I went, they really expanded the outdoor yard, and they had this little shed built, and they had a little graveyard for the children's animals. And so they wanted that to start to be part of the process in the school when a child had an animal. They even had little shovels, and they had these little ceremonies, she said, and the child got to choose how that looked from their culture. Right, what those ceremonies looked like. But she did say that after it was built and after the first few little ceremonies, that parents were coming to school saying that a lot of goldfish were dying unexpectedly. The kids wanted to be a part of it. Yep. So there, it helps you understand that they don't understand the finality of that. It was part of the curriculum, right? They just wanted to be part of that. So, but anyway, but it was a learning opportunity. But I'll never forget that story. I thought, I hadn't thought about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we can't get upset about those things. We have to understand that's where children are developmentally.
Right.
Yes.
You know, again, don't sweat the small stuff.
Right.
You know, check yourself. What is your reaction? And remember, your reactions always tell them a story about what's okay, what's not,
right.
what to think,
how
what
they
to feel.
should, how they should react.
Respond. Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, well, I know, hard topic, but definitely something we need to continue to talk about. There are great resources out there. The National Association for the Education of Young Children, you can find any article and any list of books on many of these challenging topics. So thank you for joining us. Subscribe to The Child's View and check us on Instagram. That's right. Anyway, see you later. Bye.